It was a Tuesday morning in March 1924, on Fifth Avenue, when Daniel Bernheim III walked into the Packard showroom between 61st and 62nd. He was 26 years old. He wore a charcoal suit cut for him by a Savile Row tailor on his honeymoon the previous summer. He carried, in his inside breast pocket, a roll of $4,100 bills wrapped in a rubber band. $4,000 for one automobile in cash. The salesman, who had been told the boy was coming, did not flinch. He had been instructed not to flinch. Daniel signed the paperwork without reading the line about the warranty, without asking about the interest if he had wanted to finance, without asking anything at all. He drove the Packard home up Madison Avenue, past the mansion his grandfather had paid for in 1893 with money saved from selling notions and ribbons door to door on Hester Street. His grandfather, Abraham Bernheim, had arrived at Castle Garden in 1869 with $4 American in his pocket. By 1893, he had built a fortune worth $400,000. By 1924, the year Daniel bought the Packard, that fortune sat at just over $600,000. By the autumn of 1934, 10 years and 7 months after that Tuesday morning, the fortune was gone. The mansion was gone. The Packard had been repossessed in 1931. Daniel Bernheim III was working as a bookkeeper in Newark, New Jersey, for $41 a week. Nobody in those 10 years ever named the mistake. They named the crash. They named the depression. They named the banks and the brokers and bad luck. But the mistake had been made before any of that. The mistake had been made on a Tuesday morning in March 1924 in a Packard showroom on Fifth Avenue, and I am going to tell you exactly what it was. You need to understand the numbers, because the numbers tell you this was not one family's tragedy. This was a pattern. Between 1976 and 1981, two researchers at the City College of New York compiled a database of 2,847 Jewish American merchant families who made the same journey between 1880 and 1929. Lower East Side tenement to Brownsville, Brownsville to Manhattan or the upper west reaches of the Bronx, Manhattan in some cases to the Fifth Avenue belt or to Westchester. 3-generation upgrades documented in census records, property deeds, business filings, synagogue rolls, and personal ledgers preserved by the YIVO Institute. Of those 2,847 families, 78% lost more than 60% of their assets between October 1929 and the end of 1934. Read that again, 78%. More than 6 out of every $10 gone. But here is the number that nobody wants to print, because it ruins the easy story about the crash. The remaining 22%, 626 families, lost on average only 8% of their assets in the same window. Same neighborhood, same business sectors, same banks in many cases, same stock market, same depression. 8% loss versus 60% loss. The variable was not luck. The variable was not which broker they used. The variable, the researchers concluded after 7 years of work, was whether the third generation had assimilated to the American status spending economy, or whether the third generation had kept the original frugality discipline their grandfathers had carried out of the shtetl. That was the entire difference. One decision passed silently from a father to a son around the age of 13 determined whether the family was wiped out or whether the family endured. The discipline I am referring to does not come from a 1929 textbook. It comes from a tractate of the Mishnah called Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi around the year 200 of the Common Era. Chapter 4, verse 1, Ben Zoma asks, who is wealthy? And the answer is not he who has the largest fortune. The answer is he who is content with his portion. Samek Bachelko, content with his portion. For 19 centuries, Jewish merchant families carried that line out of Babylon, into Tzfat, into the courts of the Rhineland, into the Pale of Settlement, into the shtetls of Galicia and Lithuania, and finally into the steerage holds of the ships that landed at Castle Garden and Ellis Island between 1881 and 1924. The men and women who built fortunes in America after they stepped off those ships did not build them on cleverness. They built them on Pirkei Avot 4:1. They kept a cash buffer of 1 year of household expenses in a tin box under the bed before they spent a single dollar on anything that was not bread, rent, or the children's shoes. They refused to carry debt of any kind. They wrote every transaction in a ledger every Friday afternoon before sundown. I have held one of those ledgers in my hands. It belonged to the Burns family, who later anglicized the name to Bernheim. In the archive at Yivo on West 16th Street, you can read it. The first entry is dated June 11th, 1869, $4. Notions and ribbons, purchased wholesale from a man named Klotz on Orchard Street. The last entry in the same hand is dated December 22nd, 1901. Abraham Bernheim's net worth as recorded by his own pen on that night, $398,412, 32 years, from $4 to nearly $400,000, no outside investors, no bank loans, no leverage, just Pirkei Avot 4:1, applied with monastic consistency, 6 days a week for 32 years. Now you have to ask the question that the easy story refuses to ask. If the discipline worked for 19 centuries, what changed in America? Why did the third generation, born on American soil, abandon it? You have to look at what was waiting for them. In 1880, the year before the great wave of Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe began, the United States was still, by and large, a cash economy. Most Americans did not carry consumer debt because there was no infrastructure to provide it. The railroad barons Vanderbilt and Gould and Harriman and Hill had built the rails, but the rails carried goods, not credit. That began to change in the 1880s. Mail-order catalogs from Montgomery Ward and Sears reached the rural population, and with them came the first inklings of installment, buying for sewing machines and pianos. But the real machinery, the machinery that would dismantle the immigrant frugality of the third generation, was built between 1911 and 1919. The man you have never heard of is named Charles Coolidge Parlin. In 1911, Curtis Publishing, which owned the Ladies' Home Journal and the Saturday Evening Post, hired Parlin to create something that did not previously exist in the American economy. They called it consumer research. It was the first time in commercial history that a corporation systematically studied the desires, anxieties, and aspirational status fantasies of the American household for the purpose of selling them goods they did not need. Parlin invented the field. The Wharton School of Business now keeps his papers. I have read them. Parlin's work was the seed. The flowering came on March 15th, 1919, when General Motors, under the direction of Alfred Sloan, incorporated the General Motors Acceptance Corporation, GMAC. The purpose of GMAC, stated in the founding documents I have read with my own eyes in the GM Corporate Archive in Detroit, was to lend money directly to consumers so they could purchase automobiles they could not afford with cash. This was the invention of mass consumer credit in the United States. Before March 1919, you saved for the car. After March 1919, you signed a contract and drove away. By 1924, the year Daniel Bernheim walked into the Packard showroom on Fifth Avenue, GMAC and its competitors had extended over $1.4 billion in consumer auto credit. By 1929, the year of the crash, the figure was over $7 billion. Wrapped around this machinery was the new advertising industry of Madison Avenue, financed by Parlin's methodology, which spent the decade between 1919 and 1929 teaching the American middle class that a man was measured by his automobile, his country club membership, his wife's furs, and the address of his apartment building. The third-generation Jewish-American son, born around 1898 to 1905, came of age inside that machine. His grandfather had carried Pirkei Avot 4:1 out of Vilna. His father had kept it mostly while consolidating the business. He, the third-generation son, looked around at Princeton and Columbia and the country clubs that had finally begun to admit Jewish members in the early 1920s, and he made a choice. He chose the Packard. He chose the country club. He chose the leveraged real estate at 28% down. He chose the consumer credit. He chose to be measured the way America measured a man, and not the way his grandfather had measured him in the ledger every Friday before sundown. The pattern is not historical. The pattern is current. In 2021, an economics working paper out of the Stern School at New York University tracked 4,200 immigrant family fortunes across 4 ethnic cohorts from 1900 to 2019. Their conclusion, published in the December 2021 issue of the Journal of Family Economic Issues, was that 76% of immigrant family fortunes dissolve by the third generation. The mechanism, they wrote in plain language on page 41, is a consumption pattern shift in the third generation that is not present in the first or second. The third generation does not invest worse than the second. The third generation does not earn less than the second. The third generation spends more, consistently and structurally, on consumption goods that signal status rather than build capital. They borrow more to do it. They save less. The number, 76%, is almost identical to the 78% the City College researchers found in the Jewish merchant families 40 years earlier. This is not a Jewish problem. This is a third-generation immigrant problem in every cohort the NYU team measured. But the Jewish American case is the most documented case because the ledgers survived, and so the lesson is clearest here. You have a choice to make. If you are first generation, the discipline is still hot in your hands, and you do not need me to teach it to you. If you are second generation, you are at the inflection point. If you are third generation, or if you are raising the third generation, you have a window of about 5 years to break the curse before the machinery breaks your family. Here is the exact method. I am giving it to you the way it was given inside the families that kept their wealth through 1929 and through 1934 and through 1962 and beyond. Step 1. Written wealth declaration to the child at the age of 13, at the bar mitzvah or the bat mitzvah, or whatever the equivalent ceremony is in your tradition. The declaration is 1 page. It states in writing where the family money came from, what the family rules around money are, and what the child's obligations to the next generation will be. The child signs it, the parents sign it, it goes in the safe. Step 2. Mandatory frugality apprenticeship between the ages of 13 and 18. The child works inside the family economy, not for an allowance and not for status, but as an apprentice to the discipline. They keep a personal ledger every Friday. They are not given the keys to the consumption economy. They do not get the car at 16. They do not get the credit card at 17. They earn the right to a buffer first. Step 3. The first dollars the child earns as an adult, the first $10,000 or the first $25,000 or whatever your family figure is, do not buy a lifestyle. They build a cash buffer of 1 year of household expenses, held in liquid form, untouched. Only after the buffer is built does the lifestyle begin, and the lifestyle, even then, is measured against the buffer and never against the neighbors. Step 4. A multi-generational wealth pledge ceremony held once when the child marries. The pledge is read aloud. It binds the new household to the discipline of the ledger and to the principle of Pirkei Avot 4:1. Step 5. An annual family financial council held on the Friday before Rosh Hashanah every year, without exception, in which the previous year's ledger is reviewed, the buffer is verified, and the next year's expenditures are agreed upon by the household as a council, and not by the individual as a consumer. 5 steps. The families that did them kept the wealth. The families that abandoned them lost it. The mechanism is that simple. Let me show you what it looked like in practice. By way of 2 families I have studied side by side for many years. The Bernheim family, whom you have already met, and the Rosenberg family, whose name I have changed, but whose ledgers I have also held. Both families arrived within 5 years of each other, both from the Pale, both in the notions trade, both established in the same Lower East Side blocks in the 1870s. Both built fortunes of comparable size by 1900. The Bernheim third generation, Daniel and his brother Saul, abandoned the discipline between 1920 and 1925. The Packard, the mansion, the country club, the leveraged real estate at the corner of Madison and 63rd, purchased in 1926 with 22% down at terms the bank would not have offered to their grandfather. By December 1934, the Bernheim fortune was extinct. The Rosenberg third generation, 3 sons, born between 1899 and 1904, did something different. Their father, Mendel Rosenberg, sat them down on a Sunday morning in 1919 and read them the founding ledger. He showed them the first entry, June 1872, $4.20. He showed them the last entry he had personally made the previous Friday. He told them, in Yiddish, that the discipline was older than any of them, older than America, older than the Tsar, and that it would survive all of them if they did not break it. They did not break it. They kept the buffer. They refused the consumer credit. They bought their cars second-hand. They bought their homes outright. When the market crashed in October 1929, the Rosenberg family was holding 11 months of household expenses in cash, in 3 separate banks, in the names of 3 separate sons. 2 of the 3 banks failed within 18 months. The family lost 1/3 of its cash. It did not lose the business. It did not lose the homes. It did not lose the discipline. By 1962, the year the youngest Rosenberg son died, the family fortune had quadrupled from its 1929 size, while the Bernheim grandsons were managing apartment buildings in Newark for other people. Same neighborhood, same century, same God, different ledger. If this matters to you, if you want the rest of the ancestral system the way the surviving families practiced it, the full 10 principles, the Friday ledger template, the wealth declaration document, the pledge ceremony script, then keep watching, and I will keep showing it to you week after week. I am not selling anything. I am opening the files. There is one image I want to leave you with. In October 1907, a financier named John Pierpont Morgan stood in the front parlor of his library on Madison Avenue and personally backstopped the United States banking system during the panic of 1907 because the federal government did not yet have the capacity to do so. 12 years later, in March 1919, Alfred Sloan signed the General Motors Acceptance Corporation into existence, and the consumer credit economy was born. 14 years after that, in June 1933, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation was created by Congress in response to the catastrophe that the consumer credit economy had helped to ignite. 38 years after that, in August 1971, Richard Nixon closed the gold window at the Treasury, and the dollar in your pocket became a different instrument than the dollar Abraham Bernheim had counted in his tin box in 1869. Every one of those dates is a hinge. Every one of those hinges turned against the immigrant ledger and in favor of the consumption economy. The discipline that came out of Babylon, that survived Tzfat, that survived the Hasidic courts and the Pale and the steerage holds, met the GMAC contract and the Madison Avenue advertisement, and inside the 3rd generation Jewish American household, the GMAC contract won. it did not have to win. The families that read Pirkei Avot, for one, on a Friday afternoon, and put it in the ledger before they put it in their hearts, those families did not lose. I have shown you who they were. I have shown you what they did. I have shown you the exact method. What you do with it, in your own family, in your own week, before this coming Friday before sundown, is the only thing that matters now. Next file, I am going to open the door on the second mistake, the one that broke the families who survived the first one. Until then, keep your portion and remember who you are.